Welcome everybody to the Breakthrough series run by Thoughtworks and AWS. My name's Andrew Ziogas, otherwise known as AZ. With me today, we've got the pleasure of having a very special guest, Crystal from PEXA, and also our trusty sidekick, Nick. So Nick's the Director of Customer Experience at Thoughtworks, and Nick has been with our partners and with some of our other customers in Australia and New Zealand, been running this series for a number of weeks. Crystal is the Chief Product Officer at PEXA, and she's been at PEXA since 2011. And for those that don't know who PEXA is, PEXA was the first organisation in Australia to really take the property settlement industry from a paper-based system of work to the digital age, and Crystal and her team were critical as part of that evolution. And just a little bit of sort of background into the purpose of today. The breakthrough session is around bringing the senior business leaders within our sort of organisations in Australia and New Zealand. We want to talk about sort of innovation, resilience in these uncertain times. How these leaders have helped shape their teams, how they've addressed sort of customer concerns and moving into innovation and new products moving into 2021 and beyond. So that's probably enough from me for the moment. I might pass on to Nick and Crystal to frame the session, and we can kick off.
Thanks for that, Andrew, and thanks everyone for joining us today. G'day, Crystal. You're up in Queensland at the moment?
No, I'm in Melbourne.
Oh,
I'm
you're back in
dreaming of
Melbourne.
being
Dreaming
in Queensland with parents.
No, it's an all Melbourne crew today then. Yeah, thanks everyone for popping along. So we'll jump straight into it. We'll definitely wrap up by quarter two. But appreciate your time today, Crystal. I think there's a lot we can talk about with the PEXA story, and we were chatting about it earlier. It's the fascinating origin story coming out of this coming together of all state governments and federal government in Australia, creating this tech business. And there's a lot of people who have been through situations like that would find that story fascinating. We might get to that. But I think the part that I want to start with is this idea of legacy system transformations. So many of us would have been involved in projects throughout our careers where we've had to take some an archaic old version of a platform, system, and process. We have to build a tool to digitize that. But we're usually dealing with something that's 15, 20, 30 years old. PEXA has digitized property transactions, and that is a process, a system, however you want to describe it, that's well over 100 years old. Going into that, like, what are some of the things you've learned in that process along the way? What are some of the biggest things that have come up as PEXA's tackled that over the past decade or so?
Yeah, so, as you mentioned, kind of the legal framework for property in Australia is actually more like 150 years old. And all of the states and territories were kind of doing this all differently and kind of very paper-based system, paper documents for the land registry, bank checks for settlements, etc. So as you said, our remit was really to build a national digital platform that really standardized a lot of those processes and transformed the industry. I think, mostly kind of in the early years, there was a lot of wariness, particularly amongst legal practitioners, really around, they're not really known for the uptake of technology. And you have to remember, this was quite a few years back. So we'd often get questions like, well, what happens if the internet breaks? Those sorts of things came up often then. And I think, our biggest lesson was really kind of the importance of bringing the network and our members together and actually actively supporting the change. It's not a matter of build and they will come. And I think our remit was very much to kind of build the technology, but we could see that, there's this gap of kind of getting to early adopters. How do you then get to the early majority? So we really started seeing the fact that we could build kind of really cool tech. We can put all these online support mechanisms, technology, but ultimately we needed kind of to help change with the human interaction aspect. We couldn't just do it all through digital. So we invested quite significantly in the change. So we hired a field force of PEXA direct specialists. Most of them were actually ex-solicitors and conveyancers themselves who really believed in the vision, they could talk the same language, they understood the complexities, the business processes and those sorts of things, and could really help take, those practitioners who were, not confident, didn't really quite have the trust in the network. They could actually take them on the journey. And so, we had a team that were physically sitting with all the practitioners to try and help them, join the network. We tried a whole bunch of other techniques as well. That we created a PEXA community as well. So we started to get the early adopters became great advocates. So, one of the important things about a PEXA transaction is that you need all parties to come onto the platform to do that transaction. So, for example, if I bought Andrew's house, my lawyer, Andrew's lawyer, Andrew's bank, if he has a mortgage, my bank, because I'm getting a mortgage, all have to be on that one platform, on that one transaction within PEXA. And if one person didn't want to go on, then it has to go onto paper. And so, we started seeing practitioners and conveyancers actually helping each other because they wanted to see this go digital. So they would call Andrew's solicitor, get them on board, actually step them through the process. So it was, I think, one of the greatest things that, or kind of achievements of PEXA was really trying to win the hearts and minds and building that sense of community, and our members supporting each other and the whole industry coming together to support the change. I think that was probably one of the biggest learnings, and one of the greatest outcomes, definitely.
Yeah, there's a good point there. Is that something that was baked in from the very beginning? So, I mean, in something like this, it's really easy to focus on the depth of technological change that's required and to really be focused on the technology side of things. Was there early moments in that journey that pushed you towards taking that product focus and that customer focus into things?
Well, I think, we were very much learning as we were going, right? And I think, there was just a point where we created all of these great tools, great videos, great tutorials, etc. But we could see that there was still this challenge of getting customers onto the platform, and we knew we just had to pivot and try something a bit different. And I think that's one of the great things that we were doing along this journey, was really kind of learning as we were going, testing different things to try and see what would work and what would actually change the dial to bring the network all together.
There's an interesting thing around property settlement. So again, a lot of us, tackling, legacy modernization and also building things with end customers in mind. Now, some of us will be working in e-commerce environments where that's small transactions. In PEXA's case, not only are you doing this transformation, but for the end users of this is possibly the biggest transaction of their entire lives. So this is a lot is hinging on this. There's, in some cases, millions of dollars changing hands. How did you bring customers to the center of that? And did you learn anything about how they were interacting with the world of settlements and conveyancing before then?
Yeah, so I think, very early on, our founding CEO, Marcus Price, really tried to instill kind of this culture of customer obsession, if you like in a really healthy way, really around understanding, the end-to-end journey, looking at customers, what are the pain points for buyers and sellers, why are settlements being missed today, kind of in the paper environment, which obviously is very traumatic. You plan your move, you want to move on that day, you've got your removalist truck, you've got all your furniture in there, and then all of a sudden, because of some administrative issue, your settlement fails. So there was a lot of research and understanding into what exactly are kind of those pain points that we want to try and solve. And I think, ultimately the users of our platforms are those that actually enable that transaction. So it's the conveyancers and the lawyers and also the financial institutions. So, we going on that theme of kind of customer obsession, listening to our members, listening to the industry, implementing change based on the feedback that they're giving us, closing that feedback loop as well was really important to show them that we were listening. In the previous financial year, actually, about 88% of changes that actually went through our platform were a direct result of member feedback. And so it just really is telling to say, well, this, how much we're focused on customer feedback. We've got a lot of ways that we're getting feedback in terms of, we've got tools within the PEXA product. We invite members to kind of hack days as well. We've got kind of customer focused hack days. We've got ideation tools within PEXA as well, where we get a lot of input from frontline and product teams as well, who are engaging with our customers. We've rolled out kind of rapid experimentation as well, so that we can actually get some more data before we make changes into the platform. But also, I mean, that's just the exchange itself, but, based on also listening to the customers, they're obviously getting the end consumers, I should say, the buyers and sellers. Ultimately, they're seeing the benefits of all of this moving to electronic. They're getting more certainty around actually settling, etc. But they also still have issues around visibility and, not knowing what's going on in the transaction. They're speaking to their brokers, they're speaking to their conveyancers, they're speaking to the banks. And so based on that, we also created a product, PEXA Key, which was really a way for buyers and sellers to track their settlement, just like you can track your parcel, and also give them kind of insights on kind of how to help you with your move. Because if you are moving for the first time, you don't know necessarily about insurances and, those sorts of things that you need to get to change your pets, the council, register your pets with the council and those sorts of things. So really trying to also help the customers as well, or buyers and sellers, I should say, in terms of, making that experience even better and exciting for them too. So I kind of look at it from a complete ecosystem in terms of putting the customers at the heart of the way we do products at PEXA.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind digging into that, because there's some really interesting parts there. It's great to hear that culture of innovation, that culture of customer obsession sits within PEXA. How do you make that happen day to day? I mean, there's two levels to this. At the senior end of your business, you're going to be dealing with stakeholders that perhaps are not traditionally known for their agility. If we're talking about you negotiate with the state governments across the country and new governments overseas, and then you've probably got deadlines and horizons to work towards in terms of getting stuff out to market to satisfy them. How are you sort of negotiating those conversations around bringing customer obsession into it in terms of how you wrangle stuff at the top, and then how does that reveal itself in the way your teams are operating day to day?
Yeah, so I think firstly, just in terms of the state governments and the land registries, they're actually incredibly progressive. I think, as part of the COAG initiative, all of the state governments were kind of mandated as well to transform the way that they register titles and kind of digitize that part of the process. So we're very much kind of going on a journey with them in terms of how they reach, I guess, 100% digital. And I guess when we moved from waterfall, because we started all of this in waterfall methodology, when we moved to Agile, we actually aligned teams initially to kind of market segments, and also squads that were focusing on supporting the land registries with digitization, focusing on the financial settlement piece, which is really a core component. Like, we've worked with the Reserve Bank of Australia to change the way that settlement's done completely. So we've got a team that's kind of focused on that. And then the rest of the teams that are kind of focusing on financial institutions, practitioners, etc. And that's really because the exchange is so large. We need to have multiple squads kind of focusing on these different areas to try and support, I guess, the initiative for land registries to drive to 100% digital, supporting the continuous kind of innovation and improvement in the PEXA platform, but then also recognizing that the ways that banks use the platform and the ways that practitioners use the platform are different. So that's kind of the way that we kind of set up the teams, and the teams are then focused a lot around listening and getting the feedback from those specific market areas. Today, though, we're actually pivoting a little bit in terms of focusing the teams on key priorities within the business. So we've kind of set up 10 key priorities, and this kind of ensures squads and also the different, I guess, teams across the business work together towards the same outcomes. So I'll give you an example of that. So one of the metrics, obviously we've got so much data now, we're looking at how we can further improve the outcomes for the end customers and buyers and sellers. And an example of that is how can we improve the percentage of on-time settlements? And that's basically if your conveyancer puts in a time, say 9:30 on Friday, you're settling, how can we make sure that we can get that number to basically 100% of the time, that original time that you put in is the time that you're going to settle. And I think eventually, so what actually happens is that if the transaction is not ready at 9:30, it will roll over to 10, roll over to 10:30, and it will send alerts and those sorts of things. And within that day, the percentage is incredibly high of people that actually settle. So, we're very proud of that in terms of how we move the market and improve that process. But we want to see how can we actually improve that metric even further. So looking at are there aspects of the product that we can improve in order to give earlier alerts, or can we use the data and do some sort of prediction around workspaces that might fall into that category, to start using machine learning and those sorts of things. But then also looking at it from a process perspective, with working with lenders to say, okay, we're seeing that this particular process is not being completed on time. How can we support you to do that in a better way? So it's kind of looking at these key priorities now in terms of technology, but then also looking at all those other aspects that we spoke about before around, potential changes that need to continue to occur in the industry in order to give a better outcome to the end buyer and seller. So that's something that we're working on at the moment in terms of setting up the teams.
So is that sort of the next horizon, certainly locally for PEXA? The initial remit there for that maybe for the best part of that first decade was, here's an existing system, we need to digitize this.
Exactly.
This sounds like now that we're here, we're learning about how this works. This is how we're pushing what we're learning into changes across the industry. So this is us now pushing back out into the rest of the industry and changing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's one of these learnings as well. So I went to INSEAD a couple of years ago and I did like an exec management course. And the one thing that they kept saying is that you have to keep disrupting yourself. So it's all well and good that you've got, virtually 100% of the market using the platform, but, you can't just stop there. So let's have a look at, now that we've digitized, I guess, the paper process, you look at how refinance happens today. Are there any learnings? Can we completely change the way it's done and actually keep improving? And I think that's certainly what we're looking at for refinances and also for kind of the sale purchase scenario. So just continue that evolution and just continue making it better and better and better for buyers and sellers.
Now, to the great sort of spanner in the works of the last 18 months, the pandemic continues to devastate communities and brutally disrupt industries, markets, and the status quo generally. PEXA's core business was already digitizing a traditional in-person process. So much like earlier in the year, we were talking to Michael Gillespie from Domino's, and suddenly he's in a world where everyone's needing to order food delivered to their homes, which was great. But his teams have all got to start working from home as well. His whole business has been upended at the same time. So what did it mean for your industry and your customers, to go through what we've all been through in the last 18 months, and then also about your teams and the way you've had to respond to that? Yeah,
absolutely. So I guess when COVID hit in Australia, and obviously these kind of subsequent extended lockdowns, the front end of the property sales process really came to a halt. You had auctions that had to be cancelled, inspections that had to be cancelled, etc. But the fortunate thing was that settlement was able to continue because we had thousands and thousands of workspaces or transactions that were in the pipeline. And I think if the pandemic actually hit maybe 5 years, 6 years earlier, that wouldn't have been possible. So many of our customers, and actually the lawyers, conveyancers, basically would have seen their income completely evaporate. And I think because of this, most really thankful that PEXA actually existed so they could continue to operate. And I think what was quite interesting as well is that as we were building out the platform, we did have to do this kind of state by state in terms of implementing the different jurisdictions, just so we could integrate with the land registries. And so one of the states that actually came on more recently, prior to the pandemic, we're kind of sitting on about 25% of transactions were actually going through the digital channel. But then when the pandemic hit, within a very short period, we're talking like weeks and just over a month, it went to over 90% because they realised the settlement rooms were closing, and the only way that they could continue those settlements was actually to do it onto the platform. So I think the overall positive impacts of the fact that PEXA existed, the market was fortunately able to adopt it very quickly. And I think, there were examples as well at the start of COVID where we had to pivot some of the features that we were working on in order to help support the land registry, because they needed to close their doors. And there were a number of, more rarer type of transactions that basically you couldn't hand the paper over to the land registry anymore. So we worked very closely with them to see how we could do that through a PEXA transaction. And even if it's kind of uploading the PDF version, that still enables the transaction to go through, and it might be processed manually by the land registry, but at least that enabled that. So, that quick pivot and supporting the land registry meant that, we could, open the doors more broadly to other types of transactions. I think the other part as well, and this is consistent in terms of, what we did with PEXA, is we genuinely care about our members. And I'm not just saying, I've worked for many organisations before where they might say that they don't necessarily live and breathe it, but, we care about, the well-being aspects as well. We've got, many conveyancers, lawyers who are working as sole traders and that sort of thing. So, this obviously has a devastating impact. So, we were thinking about, what sort of things we can do to help support them. We created a wellness hub online, with just simple things like great recipes, makeup tutorials, exercises, meditations, cocktail making, those sorts of things. But then also access to like resilience coaches and those sorts of things. We would, like we did for, our PEXarians within the organisation, how can you create online events or like bring a small cohort of peers together and, have some sort of fun interactive session, whether it's kind of, gin tasting or whatever it is, to try and, just help support from a mental well-being perspective. And then I think from, PEXA's perspective, we were very fortunate that we had a lot of collaboration tools already in place. So, we're using Slack, etc. I'd never used Teams before in my life, or Zoom, which is quite ironic given my role. But, it kind of leveled the playing field where everyone was now working remotely. And so we all had to kind of use these collaboration tools. And I think it's been really great particularly for teams that were kind of interstate. They often felt a little bit out of the loop because they would have to travel to the head office in Melbourne for us to have kind of more interactive sessions. Now, you can do it all remotely, which has been brilliant. And I guess, the similar things that we've been doing from a member perspective, we've got an amazing people and experienced team that, really mobilised initiatives to kind of help the teams and their families, organising kids clubs online, social activities, company-wide trivias, those sorts of things. So, I think I'm happy to see that this is hopefully coming to an end, and whatever that new normal looks like, I think we've really kind of, had to embrace that, what's the best way of working remotely. And I think we've done that really well.
That's great. I'll pop you one quick question, and then we'll throw it open to AZ and some of the questions that are coming in on the Q&A. But you just spoke there about the various jurisdictions and how you're at different levels of maturity and rolling that out there. The next challenge that you've set your sights on is this expansion into the UK. So this isn't being driven by them. This is being driven by PEXA. And there are obvious similarities. Our colonial land registry system is based on the British system, but if ours is 150 years old, theirs is going to date back centuries even further. what have you learned from Australia that you're applying there, and what are some of the new things you've had to learn there that change the mission in the UK?
Yeah, so I think, you know, one of the big benefits of actually moving to a different country is that you've picked up 10 years of IP, 10 years of learnings, how you get kind of the market moving, what are aspects about the product, how you would do things differently, in terms of, you know, we obviously started in waterfall, we're now doing it in agile, so big focus on UX, etc., to try and make things much easier for customers. I mean, ultimately, all markets are different. And we did start the research a couple of years ago, actually, with the UK, and we really tipped off, I guess, to go over there in the first place, because we had a number of visitors from across the different countries coming to PEXA and visit our offices and see how we've done it, speaking to, you know, financial institutions, conveyancers, PIC bodies, to say, how did you guys do this? And also speaking with the land registry. So we knew there was interest. So similar to, I guess, in Australia, we originated off the back of that COAG initiative to kind of drive this national platform. We saw the success of, you know, all of the industry bodies and government coming together. So in the UK, it is a little bit different. So we're actually kind of doing that a little bit in reverse. So, you know, we're actively engaging with government bodies and government departments in England, you know, whether it's kind of digital teams, Treasury, etc., to get their support, speaking to regulators. And I guess, you know, the PEXA story is resonating so well because it's a massive pain point in the UK as well. No one's really looked to digitise that part of the process. There's a lack of visibility, operational inefficiencies, operational resilience is an issue as well. So, you know, really pleasingly, you know, I've spent the last 5 months in the UK speaking to the industry, and the story is really resonating incredibly well. And, you know, it's really a proof point that we have been able to do it in Australia, and there's huge interest over there. We haven't actually had anyone push back. Like, they just say, you know, it's great that you're coming. We wish you were here a little bit earlier, but we want you here. So it's been really good.
Great. I'll throw it to you, AZ. There's a couple of questions coming in. We'll throw it up into questions, and you know, in the sort of three or so minutes we've got left.
Yeah, feel free to send through your questions, everybody. I might start with the first one. Crystal, this was back to the comment on customer obsession. So the question is, how do you translate that customer obsession into the day-to-day? And I think the question then goes into how do you prioritize the next thing you're working on as a derivative of that thinking?
Yeah. So I think the customer obsession day to day was something that we built on. So, you know, we started off with hack days, right? So we went to organizations to see, how did you become customer obsessed? And we could see these different techniques that they started implementing into their organizations that we started bringing in. So, you know, things like hack days, things like we use a tool in PEXA to gain feedback, and that's also used to measure NPS. So we had everyone in the company download the app, and then we would have a bit of a competition around how many people logged in, i.e. we want you to have a look at the feedback on a daily basis. And then, you know, who's responding to customer feedback. So we'll constantly, I guess, looking at different ways that we can you know, encourage the teams to be really interested and curious around the feedback, because ultimately everything that we're doing is you know, we're building that for the end customer. So there is a lot of these different things. In terms of prioritization, it's a good question. It's a one that I think not everyone gets right, so it's a bit of a trial and error. One of the things that we're doing, I mean, obviously we have feedback on almost on an hourly basis, and there are some things that are incredibly obvious, and you're hearing the same sentiments over and over again. And I think traditionally what we used to do was we'd take that piece of feedback, we'd say, okay, we've had 20 people say this piece of feedback, so we'll prioritize that and we'll implement the change. But I think what we're trying to pivot towards is this experimentation that I mentioned before, this prototyping, where let's try and put something into the platform that's like a fake version of that feature, and actually start gathering data points on whether there is genuine interest in this type of feature if we were to implement it. And so I think now we're trying to pivot more to putting a bit more science, a little bit more data behind how we prioritize features. And you know, so far it's working incredibly well. You know, we are able to put prototypes in very quickly into the platform too. And that's helping to drive a lot of initiatives and prioritization. And then also customer and innovation is really a key pillar of our company scorecard as well. And we measure that on a quarterly basis. And I think that really also just helps encourage teams to kind of have that front of mind as well, because all of their efforts are contributing to that, those metrics.
Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. I'll go to the second question. Given that PEXA is now established, and I think we spoke about this a little bit, given that PEXA is now established, what initiatives are you working on that will see the business grow, and what do these channels potentially look like?
So I'm not sure how much of that we can reveal, but no. So obviously the international expansion is a big one for PEXA, and looking at kind of other services that we could potentially offer to the Australian market. For example, you know, we've got a lot of interesting data about, you know, the market, etc. So is there something that we can do there? You know, ultimately we're looking at how can we keep making this process better and better for the buyer and seller. So, you know, it's looking at, are there any kind of cool partnerships that we can do that can really help take, you know, this to the next level, and how can you try and digitize the end-to-end process if that's actually, you know, possible? How can you get to that ultimate outcome of taking that stress and that pressure away from a buyer and seller when they actually should be celebrating the most important transaction that they'll do in their life? So there's a lot of things that we're looking at around those aspects.
Thanks, Crystal. This next one is also perhaps one you can't completely comment on, but I'd be interested to see if you've got any feedback. So the question is, how is your relationship with the financial institutions in the UK developing? Do you have any feedback from the larger banks on if they're keen to sort of go down this path and use the platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I went over there in February this year, basically, I think every day it was just multiple meetings with different lenders in the UK, and they are incredibly interested. You know, we're focusing on launching remortgages first, which is refinances, because I think one of the learnings from Australia is to start with kind of an easier transaction to then try and ease the industry into that change. And so all of the feedback and the sentiments from lenders has been extraordinary. Actually, it's resonated incredibly well, and some of those lenders have actually come to Australia in the past. So there is a lot of interest, and I don't think I can say any more. Sorry.
Thanks, Crystal. There's no other questions that are currently on the Q&A. So if you've got something, feel free to send it through really quickly. Otherwise, Nick.
Yeah, I think.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Nothing else for me. I think we're on time. Just a minute or two over. Thanks, AZ, for your help today. Sort of coming into the team. It's been great to have you join us, and thanks, Crystal, for your time chatting to us and sharing your amazing story from PEXA. Really interesting pieces in there, and lots for us to think about, I think. Great.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It was awesome.
Great stuff. And yeah, we'll AZ and I have got a cunning plan for the next event, and we're still stitching that together, but we'll get in touch with folks when we've landed that fish, and we'll let you know then. But thanks everyone for joining us.